And I just started to look at different people's views on what I had been so immersed in inside this
Yeah.
bubble. And it started to make me see what was wrong with it. It started to make me see the crossover between wellness culture and diet culture. It made me see how I was actually perpetuating some of the damage. And so I started going down that rabbit hole and really feeling a lot of shame for my past actions, behavior, the way that I had things that I had said, how I used to teach, and really wanted to clean that up. It was running parallel with my study of decolonizing my spiritual
Yeah.
business.
Welcome to the Feminist Wellbeing Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Dozier, non-diet nutritionist and cognitive behavior coach, and I've earned myself a PhD in diet culture. And at the age of 40, after graduating from a 25-year dieting career, I said, hell no more. And I'm here today to guide you on how to feel damn good by reshaping your mind, not the size of your pants. And in this podcast, we're going to deep dive into the world of spiritual healing. And I'm going to give you a bit of an insight into my own journey and how I came to the world of spirituality myself and how it ties into diet culture. And Meg has a similar journey as well. My guest for today, Coach Meg Pearson, she is one of my professional client. And let me give you my short story on spiritual healing first. I was raised in a Catholic family, and at the age of 15, I rebelled against my family religion. And I was non-practicing agnostic atheist for all of my 30s. And in my 40s, in my last attempt of finding a solution for controlling the size of my pants, I went to the world of spirituality. If we dial back the clock, that's about 10 years. But around the age of 39 or 40, I was desperate because even after going back to school, graduating with a nutrition degree, still I couldn't control my eating behavior. And I got introduced to the world of spirituality to a friend. And that was kind of my last attempt to find a solution, because I went to the world of spirituality with the promise from gurus that I would release, quote, the emotional weight, right? That the purest form of a spiritual being is obviously thin, right? White, thin, and well-being, right? Healthy. Like if I was finding the path of alignment, the supreme path of alignment, and I was going to be like this spiritual being, I had no choice but to be thin. And I went into spirituality with that promise, and obviously it didn't work. And I kept on the path of spirituality, and I discovered a new set of beliefs that really represented me, that had nothing to do with the gurus and the promise of weight loss. And for me, I found Buddhism. So it was toxic in a way where, again, I was promised that I would lose the emotional weight, but it delivered something very beautiful on the other side of it. However, the reason why I'm talking about that today is I coach many women who went down the same path as Meg and as me in a very, I don't like using the word toxic, but in a way, a very toxic promise from the world of spirituality and spiritual healing, most particularly, where again, it's just a different, the same pig with a different lipstick, right? It's again, deeply entrenched into fat phobia, deeply entrenched in diet culture and wellness culture and healthism. But it presents itself as spiritual healing, the ultimate form of healing where you're being connected with your highest power in the light. And I wanted to do an episode on this because, as you probably can sense from my introduction here, I think there's a lot of danger to that to that world of spiritual healing. And I wanted to do it with someone who has a lot of lived experience in that world and a lot of expertise. And her name is Meg, Coach Meg, my client, who has worked with me through the non-diet coaching certification and has brought into her work the non-diet approach in the world of spirituality. And Meg has such a powerful story around her own healing. So without any further ado, I think the best thing to do is to go to the interview that I did with Meg and then hope that it will help you. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Meg.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm grateful that you are here because we have rescheduled that 4 to 5 times because I was adamant to have this conversation with you. You came into my world a year ago or so, and your journey in all different angle of healing, I think needs to be told, and we need to learn from your story. So I would like you to get us back as far as you want us to go back and talk to us about how your journey of healing started and take us through the journey, and then we'll interact from there.
Okay. Well, I will be as succinct as possible because I've written hundreds of pages of a book about this story
Yeah.
so far. But I grew up in small town Ontario, small town rural Ontario, and very early on developed unhealthy relationship with my body due to sexual trauma. There was
Okay.
molestation, there was a lot of stuff within the school system and even in my family life, not my immediate family, but distant cousins, that led me to be really confused about my body, sexuality, and all of that. And so early on, I started to seek control, which led to early development of an eating disorder and dependence on alcohol. So I was smoking cigarettes and getting blackout drunk every weekend, but when I was 15 years old, and full blown into bulimia as well at that point. And that was something that stayed with me until I was in my mid 30s. Developed into like the dependence on alcohol that I started with in high school was full on alcoholism in my 20s. I wanted to leave this town, this small town that I lived in, because I just hated everything about it. It's where all my pain began. So I went off and became a television director, and I did that for 10 years in
With
Toronto.
the eating disorder and the
Oh yeah,
alcohol addiction,
oh yeah.
by being functional in a career.
Super functional, super functional. And the crazy thing is, working in the television industry, especially back then, this was in the early 2000s, it was kind of normal, right? It was normal to abuse drugs and alcohol. It was normal to be doing whatever you can to have a smaller size body. And so no one really batted an eye at my lifestyle. Behind the scenes, I was unhappy. I had no connection to family. I had no real relationships at all, no friendships outside of my working environment. My life consisted of my addictions, my eating disorder, the alcohol, and work. And that was day in and day out what I did for about a decade. Now, in my late 20s, when I was 29, 30, I went through a series of events, including a pretty bad experience with my eating disorder where I was trying to make myself throw up using a spatula and I ended up swallowing it and had to go to the ER to have that removed. So near death experience with that. The same time that happened, I was going through a really rotten breakup with my first fiance. My father was sick with ALS and FTD, so a type of dementia and Lou Gehrig's disease. My nephew had just had a brain tumor. I was bankrupt because of the cost that I had accrued so much debt from my lifestyle. That I was in a personal bankruptcy. So there was just a lot of crazy stuff happening. And my father passed away in early 2011. And it was all of that happening at once. And then my father's passing that made me really realize I wasn't living much of a life at that time. And it was his death that really taught me that I wanted to live. And so the week after his funeral, I went to Cuba and I sat on the beach. I got really, really drunk, slept with the bartender, slept with strangers, did all the super unhealthy things. But it was there that I decided I wanted to leave my career in television finally and fully and do two things that I felt passionate about. And at that point in my 20s, I had delved into yoga and had the raw food, the raw vegan food scene had just become a big thing in Toronto. So I knew when I ate raw food, I felt comfortable with that food, and I knew I loved yoga. So I went back to Toronto, quit my job, and became a raw food chef and a yoga teacher, and started doing that. Fast forward 2 years later, I had gone to Costa Rica on a vacation, and the retreat center that I was staying at hired me. So I sold everything in 2013 in Toronto, and I moved to Costa Rica. And during that period, I started to redevelop a relationship with my body. And I also dove deep into the spiritual world, obviously. And I was practicing yoga twice a day. I was eating nothing but raw vegan food for a long time, which I realize now looking back, it was kind of a transference of my restriction, but at least I was eating food and keeping it down. So it was a step in the right direction.
And did that appease the eating disorder? Like the bulimia went away as you were eating raw vegan? Is that the idea?
Yeah, it did for long periods of time until something like a divorce from my Costa Rican husband came up.
Something ignited.
Yeah. And so then the everything's out of control. What can I control? And so I would eat healthily and then for 2 meals a day, but then I would go out and spend $70 on a binge and go home, and it would be like a drug. It would be like eat it to numb, purge it to not feel. Like this
Yeah.
is was the cycle. It was when I was breaking up with that husband of mine. I married this man while I was in Costa Rica. I realized he never wanted to improve his life. He also drank a lot. He was unhealthy. But I had started down a path with plant medicine. So I had discovered psychedelics, namely ayahuasca. And it became clear to me the more yoga I did, the more I meditated, the more I started to explore this idea of psychedelics, that my healing was going to be kind of stunted if I didn't let go of at least the alcohol. So I did a lot of preparatory work, and somatic breath work, somatic work was really powerful for me to finally release the anger that I didn't realize I was holding for all of those years, anger towards all of the men that had hurt me in my youth, anger towards the authority figures that didn't show up to protect me during my childhood. All of that anger was something that I didn't realize that the abuse of, substances and the eating disorder was allowing me, like that's what I was numbing, was that anger. I mean, as you know, women aren't supposed to feel rage. So, so we are taught to numb it. And I had to go to like pretty extreme measures in order to do so because I had so much of it. But I started healing that. And by the time I was 37, I was far enough along and I had enough tools in my quote spiritual toolbox that I could get sober. And I didn't do that through a 12-step program. I actually did that through a ceremony with a plant medicine. A plant medicine from Africa. One night, 30 hours, full body detox and projectile vomiting, you name it. All of the symptoms that you would have going through a regular detox from alcohol. I experienced it in one night, and I have not wanted to or gone back to the alcohol since. And I'm 44. So that really opened me up because the minute I wasn't drinking, I had to learn how to feel. And so the healing journey, I dove deep with all everything I could get my hands on for several years, not just to learn how to work with my emotions and be okay with overwhelm, but also I had to learn how to be a woman again, connected to my femininity and my sexuality because I had been so disconnected from that as well. And so that became my work, not only for myself, but I worked full time at a retreat center for 7 years there that was all about trauma healing and really supporting a lifestyle of quote unquote clean, sober living and stuff like that. But also started inadvertently coaching people. And so my business that I started in 2012 as a raw vegan culinary educator had morphed over the last decade plus. And I do a lot more coaching and I do a lot of somatic breath work with people now as well. Yeah.
We met when you discovered, or shortly after you discovered the word diet culture. Is that how we
Yeah.
met?
Well, we met because I've always, in and out of all of the work that I've done, even as a chef, I've been very much vocal about eating disorders and bringing
Yes.
awareness to to the causes and wanting to use yoga to help support healing from eating disorders. I used to volunteer when I lived in Toronto working in TV. I volunteered at an eating disorder recovery center called Sheena's Place that I think is still there. So it's always been woven in. And even as a raw vegan chef, I called myself an intuitarian. That was like
Ooh.
we were like, oh, so because I was raw vegan for a long time and then I wasn't. And people got super confused, like, oh, but you teach raw vegan, but you're not raw vegan. I'm like, no, I'm an intuitarian. I follow, because it worked for a period to be that strict. But then I realized this, when I got pregnant with my daughter was a really big shift, that following my body's cues in all things, right? In eating, in the way that
Yes.
I breathe, in the way that I need to feel, and listening to my intuition, all of that has been super important. When I was leaving the bubble that was, because I moved back to Canada last year, I didn't tell you that. I was in Costa Rica for 10 years. I just returned to Canada in 2023, and I had to unpack that 10 years and how it affected me and what it was going to mean to leave that bubble of holistic healing back to Canada, to the Great White North, to society, to the news, to all of that. And I just started to look at different people's views on what I had been so immersed in inside this
Yeah.
bubble. And it started to make me see what was wrong with it. It started to make me see the crossover between wellness culture and diet culture. It made me see how I was actually perpetuating some of the damage from diet culture through wellness. Like I was
Mhm.
a coffee enema advocate for a long time. Like I was doing a lot of that stuff. And it was for the health, but really,
Yeah.
but really, what are most people doing it for, right? And so I started going down that rabbit hole and really feeling a lot of shame for my past actions, behavior, the way that things that I had said, how I used to teach, and really wanted to clean that up. And it was running parallel with my study of just decolonizing my spiritual business,
Yes.
because I studied very closely with indigenous cultures, primarily people from the Amazon. When I was working
Mhm.
with plant medicine, ayahuasca is a plant from the Amazon, and one of my teachers was Colombian, and under permission, I was studying that path of plant medicine and learning and using tools. And there's a picture behind me on the. If you're watching video, I had an ayahuasca wedding. I got married to my present husband on ayahuasca, right? With a Colombian shaman. That's But as I left that bubble and came back to Canada, I started thinking, oh, it doesn't feel right to be having my website covered with photos of me wearing Colombian ceremonial garb,
Mhm.
So I started studying. I worked with a woman actually here in Canada. Her name's Emily Brandt. She is an Indigenous educator here in Canada. And I did some work with her, some coaching, some programming, and it really helped me see that I needed to decolonize things, that my the way I was teaching things like manifestation and all of that was coming from this privileged white woman lens, you know? And so that crossover from like decolonizing and also realizing that so much of what I was teaching in quote unquote holistic wellness was diet culture and from this place of privilege. And it started to feel so icky. I got so angry. I got so angry at myself. I got so angry at the world that I wanted to do things differently. I still wanted to teach about all the powerful things that have worked for me
Yes.
and that have healed me that I love, but I wanted to do it in a less harmful way and give words to that because a lot of people in the wellness world don't even see.
Many people will come out of diet culture, they'll recognize that thinner is not better, and then they go to that wellness spiritual world thinking that must be the right place to be then. Like that's righteously, like this is good. And I've seen over the years of coaching many people and being in it myself, it actually can be as damaging, harmful, toxic as diet culture is. So, what is that dark side of wellness culture slash spiritual healing?
Well, there's lots.
I
There's
know.
many
Pick
different angles
one
to
and
it.
then start.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's what I've really seen for myself, and I see it in a lot of my clients. You're only good enough if you are drinking the green juice and doing the yoga and putting the effort in every single day to move your body, like all of these things that are good. right? They're good at it on the surface, but most people are doing it and attaching their self-worth to it, which is, and I mean, I'm as guilty of as it is the next guy. I have found myself in that off and on. Like even some days I wake up and I'm feeling rotten about myself and I think, oh, if I just do the right things, like, and if I sit and meditate, then I'm going to be a better person and things are going to go my way, you know? Um, and so there's that component, which I think is a really, really dark side, and it's insidious, you know, the way that diet culture and this whole idea that especially women that we're not good enough unless we are acting a certain way, showing up a certain way, looking a certain way, of course. Um, how that just seeps into every aspect of the yoga culture. I mean, I remember one day when I last winter when I was here in Canada and I was just reflecting on this consistently. I made a post on social media where it was something along the lines of there's two versions of the mom that shows up at school drop off. There's the mom that shows up in her Lululemon with her green juice and looks like she's off to her yoga class, and you know, and then there's me who's in my pajamas and haven't brushed my hair, and you know, and then caption that. Like, what are people going to say about each of those moms? There's going to be stories that are completely inaccurate, but they're based on society's perception about what is a good mom, what is a good person, who would be a better role model for their kids, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that whole side of it. And then one of the other big things that I've come to recognize is this idea that the healing is never done and it's all about the individual, and there's no need to reflect on the collective, that it's really just about you finding your higher self. That's what the goal is. Connect to you, your intuition, self-care, right? Like all of this me mentality to the detriment of collective, to the detriment of families. And that's one thing that I have seen time and time again in the plant medicine world, unfortunately, is someone going to the medicine, doing a lot of quote work on the medicine, and then quitting their job, leaving their family, ditching their kids, forgetting all responsibility because quote the medicine told them to. And then all of the shrapnel, right? All of the fallout with the family relations, like kids losing their parents because someone decided they didn't want to live in the quote matrix anymore. And this happens all the time. People are just using the spiritual path as an excuse to forget about responsibility. And it's gross. It's gross.
Is that what people coin as spiritual bypassing?
That's a whole other conversation in and of itself. This idea that we can think our way out of our circumstance. And
Yes.
I do believe in the power of manifestation and vibrating at that level of how you want to live and how you want to feel. I mean, myself, I woke up feeling pretty rotten this morning. I put on a good song and danced, and yeah, all of a sudden I felt better. Like I was able to shift my energy. I just taught a breathwork class today about shifting your energy. So there's something to that, right? Become the vibe you want to be. But if you're living someplace in the world that's being bombed right now, you can't
Mm-hmm.
believe your way out of that, right? If you were born into a socioeconomic status that has you limited by your resources, you can't just believe your way out of that, right? There's massive action that needs to take place. If you were born with a certain background, like there's so many ways that we have to just recognize the unlevel playing field. And in spirituality, it comes back to, but we're all one, right?
Yes.
And I don't want to get political, but this really came to the forefront for me last year when the war broke out last October,
Mm.
and couldn't share on social media. I felt like anything I had to say about health and wellness was just it couldn't matter at that point. It all felt so inappropriate. It felt so unimportant given what was going on in the world. And I shared that. I put words to that. And I had so many people from the spiritual world reach out to me and just bypass all of the darkness that was in the world, telling me that this is the time they need me to be my light more than ever. Race doesn't exist. We're all one. And I was like, fuck. unfollow, block, unfollow, block, unfollow, block.
But
That's where I,
that's the whole spiritual bypassing, right? We're
yeah,
if we just believe in the light and see the light and be the light, then there will be no darkness.
yeah,
And I'm not in the same lineage of spirituality and you. I'm more into Buddhism. But when you look at this other way of spirituality, there's always black and white. It's always 50-50. It's never just light. The spiritual healing world wants us to believe that there's a place where there's only going to be light, and we have to work towards that.
yeah. And forgetting that while we're on our way there, if it does exist, we're still human.
Yes.
And, and it is our job as compassionate light bringers, if that's what you want to call us, to shine light on all that is wrong so that we can begin to change it and heal it. And if we're just going to pretend that all of the shit that's going on in the world isn't happening, we're never going to get to this utopia because it's got to be all of us, right? It's got to be all of us or none of us. And I've just starting to realize that. I mean, I'm not starting, but it's becoming more and more important for me to teach that and honor that. And it, like, even in my I have a women's group, and one of the women didn't want to show up this morning because she's woke up having a really shitty day, and she's like, I didn't want to show up. I didn't want to bring everyone down. It's like, well, that's when you need to show up more. Right? When you're down, when someone else is down, that's when we all need to show up more. When stuff's going on in the world that's dark, the light needs to show up, but we can't pretend that the dark's not happening. We need to shine our light on that dark so that we can start to really acknowledge it and make sure more and more people are acknowledging it so that inevitably one day, hopefully there can be change. And it's also hard because there's so much that I know for myself, I feel helpless, when there's so much going on in the world that seems so far away yet hits home so much energetically. It's hard to not just go into a spiral of helplessness as well.
I want to highlight a part of spiritual healing where it's about still maintaining non-body diversity. It's still about like the white person, but the thin person. And ultimately, and I know a lot of people in my world go to spiritual healing, hoping that will be what will make them thin for the rest of their life. Because if they're fully aligned to the light, then they have no choice but to lose the weight and become in the ideal body. Have you seen that in your world of spiritual healing as well?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a part that people want to and assume they're going to look when they do this work. Not only does it involve like beads and hats and feathers, right? But yeah, there's this assumption, and I think it's what's hard is that it's also because there's so many teachers out there saying when you do the work, everything just falls away, all of your energetic weight, the burdens you've been carrying, and like that's a big part of
Your
the miracle.
emotional weight. I remember being told that your emotional weight will release itself, shush, magically.
Yeah, without any explanation as to why that should matter, right? Like there's never, once you release that emotional weight, these are the benefits, right? Like it's just this, it's assumed that everyone wants to release their emotional weight, which is not the case, right?
And that ultimately the ideal spiritual person is thin
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
vegan and drink orange juice and wear beads and feathers and big rim hats, right?
It's an ideal look. It's a performative energy. I mean, I post about this all the time and it gets me follows and unfollows, but I share memes all the time of people that are so spiritual and the things that they say about fasting for 72 hours and and it's made them working. They have so much more energy for work. And it's just until we start realizing how satirical that is. And we should be seeing that this has got to be a joke. If people think that this is really what we should be aspiring to in the spiritual world, like that's crazy. It's crazy. We have to really see that it's a costume. It's a front. It's not obligatory, right? You want to be spiritual, you want to dive deep into what it is you believe that's out there beyond this time and space, beyond our human bodies, beyond matter. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to do a certain practice. It doesn't have to be an hour a day. It doesn't have to be anything. It's about living. It's about being present in this experience and truly being open to discover what is what's limiting you, what your stories are, what everything that you do in your coaching. I've done Stephanie's coaching program, and all of this self-inquiry and that's so much of what spiritual work is. It's about becoming the observer of ourselves in our day-to-day life.
Without judgment. So you've been in this world for decades, right? You were in it before it became trendy to be in it. Like you're an OG of that world. You find that funny when people say, but that's true.
Yeah, I feel like because it did. It was a strange thing when I decided to pack up my backpack and become a yoga teacher in Costa Rica. Everyone was like, "What?" But now everybody's doing it.
So you kind of swung like the pendulum, right? You went all the way to the other end, and now you're coming back into the middle, right? Where spirituality can be lived with our arm and positive for you. Like, how can you describe the pendulum where it's at now? If I'm going all the way to the other end to no pendulum, like to no spirituality, to all the way to the other end to now.
Yeah.
Like, what's that? What's your medium?
Well, the first word that comes to my mind right now is like the pendulum is kind of landed in a place of trust
Okay.
where I'm learning to trust the process. I'm out of this area of shame that I was in a year ago because I know that it's all been a part of the path for me. I'm going to be a better teacher, a better leader, and a better student on my spiritual path because of it. So I'm trusting. I feel like I'm more on the ground and in the earth and on this plane that I was for the last 8 or so years. I felt like I spent a lot of time up in the cosmos, right? Which is a beautiful place to be. And there's a lot of wisdom to be had and a lot of learning there. But I've been working really hard, and my daily practice, what I do with my students, is about bringing all of that beautiful wisdom that exists out there beyond this world into the body, into the soma, right? The somatics. This is a big part of it, while also honoring that life, right? We don't need to be going on retreats. We don't need to be spending millions of dollars. We don't need to be doing anything outside of waking up and setting aside some time for ourselves every morning, making it accessible. Having some sort of faith is important, but it doesn't have to be a big, expensive, and extensive thing in our life. So I did a plant medicine ceremony about 3 weeks ago. I was in Costa Rica. I led a retreat there. I just said, we don't need retreats, but I do retreats. But it was called the super fun and spiritual retreat.
Yeah. Or you could call them the unretreat. Retreat.
Yeah, totally. But I spoke with a friend of mine who was working the ceremony after the fact, and we were just talking about this idea of faith because earlier this year, so I've been having this big process for almost 2 years now since I left Costa Rica about my relationship with spirituality, about my relationship with wellness and all of that. And earlier this year, Stephanie, I found out I was pregnant, and I'm 44 now. Long story short, years ago, before I even knew my now husband, who is a red-haired man, I never thought I wanted to have kids. I was told I would never be able to have kids for medical reasons. Same with him. But before I even met him, someone I knew in the spiritual community had a vision of me with 3 red-haired babies. And I remember at the time I was like, fuck that. I don't want kids. And I'm never dating a redhead. Not my type. But then at the end of 2018, I met my husband. We got pregnant. And since then, I've had 2 red-haired babies. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And earlier this year, I got pregnant again. And immediately I didn't question it. I said, of course. This is my 3rd red-haired baby. This was written in the stars. Well, 3 months into that pregnancy, I ended up losing the baby. And I didn't realize until 3 weeks ago in my ayahuasca ceremony that moment shattered my beliefs and my faith around all things spiritual. Mm. And for the last 4 months, I have been struggling more than I've ever struggled before because I had so much faith in that vision that when I lost that baby, I lost my faith in everything. I lost my faith in all of it. And that night 3 weeks ago, when I was in that psychedelic ceremony, I got to heal that. I got to hold my baby. My pillow that I was snuggling with all of a sudden became my baby. I got to hug her. Whew, I got to feel her. I got to say goodbye to her, and I got to say thank you to her, because it reminded me that everything is cyclical, that she was my third baby, that I needed her and I needed to lose her to find my faith again. And so I'm just now in this, I'm trusting again. And I look back and I can see so many little checkpoints in my life that have been hard, but have brought me to this point where I'm like, okay. And and so that's kind of my guiding light now, is really just seeing for myself and helping the people that I work with, even my own family, my daughter included, like just to see and accept, like, life is hard and we can do hard things and we need to have a faith. We need to have faith, because there's this whole story that, this idea of, what is faith, right? And what's the importance of faith? Well, tell a little person to spend 3 days believing that there's nothing that happens after you die, that it's nothing, that's it, life is over, darkness forever. And then tell that same little person, okay, now for 3 days, imagine with every part of your being that when you die, you go to this beautiful utopia where it's ice cream and unicorns and Nintendo games and all of that amazing stuff. And then after those 6 days, which version is going to help you feel better as you move through life, right? Are you going to feel better believing there's nothing? Or are you going to feel better believing that there's a utopia, right? And that's faith, right? There's no proof, but I'm going to feel better every single day thinking that at the end of my life, I get unicorns and cotton candy and Nintendo games and snuggles with my kids, right? And that's what faith is. And that's what spirituality is. And that's what religion is. And that's what all of this, to me, like, if it makes us feel good, like if crystal bracelets do make me feel good, I'm going to wear them. I'm not believing that they're going to solve world hunger, but they make me feel good, you know?
But I think that's what you describe all along. Like when spiritual healing gets dark is when you believe you have to. What you're describing right now is I choose to. I know I don't have to. Now it's a full on I choose to. Is that a
Yeah.
great perspective?
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And yes, it is all, it's informed, it's consensual, right?
Yes.
Whew, which is the big theme, like when I teach breath work. And I think that's what stands me apart from a lot of people in this space. When I teach breath work, which can be a super emotive experience, it's always about consent. Every single person that comes to a breathwork session with me, they're a sovereign being of choice. I'm going to offer you patterns of breathing. I'm going to offer you cues, but you get to choose whether you want to partake. I'm not going to push you through hard emotions. I'm not going to, the only way out is through. Well, okay, sure. Great idea. But when you're in it and you're having a traumatic response or a big emotional response, I'm not going to push you to it. I'm going to say, if you want to, go. If not, take a step back. And that is a really important part for me as I teach and lead in this space. It has to be consensual.
So if somebody's listening to this and is in that place in the world of spiritual healing, and you had to give them some pointers, advice, things to look for that could, I don't know, be not healthy if there's such word, but not a great place. Like it's not a great path of spiritual healing for them. What should they watch for in their leaders, gurus?
Well, watch on Netflix How to Spot a Cult Leader. First of all,
That's a great starting point. Go watch that.
yes. In fact, watch all the Netflix documentaries on all of the spiritual leaders, because you can learn a lot. Woo, man! And there's been a lot of those coming out over the last couple of years. But yeah, anyone that's calling themselves a guru, steer clear of.
Well, yeah, yes, that's true. Like,
For the most part, right? I don't even like to call myself a healer. I'm not. I'm not a healer. But people that are
why?
always calling, because I don't feel like anything I do heals anyone. People heal themselves. People,
Yes. So those who pretend that they can heal you, run away from them.
yeah. Even the most powerful shamans from the Amazon that I've worked with, even they will say like they're doing chants, they're doing stuff, but it's the medicine, it's the universe, it's you and the medicine, it's you and the universe doing the work. It's not them. So that I think is a big one, is a huge one, and anyone that calls themselves the healer that is offering a transformation that seems too good to be true,
Yeah.
steer clear, right? Because no one knows your starting point, right? All of us are coming from different backgrounds, different histories, different childhood adverse or not experiences, right? So just making sure that whoever you're working with is, or whatever, even whatever practice you're exploring is able to meet you where you're at is really, really important. Anyone that's telling you to not worry about the financial investment because the energy you need to like you need to go big or go home, you need to tell the universe that you know you're worth it, all of that, and you're going to go into debt and not pay your mortgage because of some spiritual teacher, like no. Like I offer so many discounts and stuff to my clients that I'm like, you would be mad at me, Stephanie. I don't make enough money because I'm always just like, here, I want to help everyone. Come for free, you know? Like, so like, I need some lessons on that,
Yeah.
boundaries financially. But yeah, and just really honoring the fact that having a spiritual practice doesn't mean that you need to be carving out and having this huge morning routine that everyone is always talking about on social media. My spiritual practice some days is waking up, hearing my 2 year old crying from mommy from the next room, and taking 30 seconds to breathe and saying, what do you got for me today, soul? Like that's my practice. Sometimes that's all I can get in.
Then you roll out of bed and head to that bedroom, and that's this that morning routine.
Yeah. But that morning, that sets the tone enough for me for the day that I'm like, okay, I've told my soul that I'm open, guide me.
Let's
And
roll.
that's yeah, let's roll, you know?
Can I add, if the leader you are in, disregard the reality of this world, disregards the dark, the war, the diversity that is intrinsic to this world, you also are in the wrong place.
And if they're not recognizing the uneven playing field of the individuals.
But it also comes from often the individual self. Like in the spiritual world, often people say, I've done my work, but they've done their work limited to who they are in this world, right?
Mm.
And often the white people do the white people work that is privilege work. Like they're not down to the reality of all the other individual in this world, and they are not connected to that reality.
Yeah, they're doing the privileged and individualized work. Don't even, if you know the word white fragility, don't even know,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you
Or
know?
that's not true, just the light,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Hmm.
So tell people, because I want them to know that spiritual healing is there and that you offer it differently. So how do you help people? Where can people find you? What do you do to help people in that world?
So I'm most active on Instagram where I go all over the place. And talk about everything and anything on Instagram. Anything that's on my heart, I share about, good, bad, and the ugly. So that's at Coach Meg Pearson on Instagram. That's the most active place. I do virtual breath work. That's my most popular thing right now. It's a virtual women's circle. I have women from all over the world, US, Canada, France, where we gather once a week. And this morning we got together for 90 minutes and we cried for half of it. Like all of us just talking about how shitty life is right now. And then honoring each other's, the ability that we can all just show up as we are. So I do that. I offer that. It's a 6 month program. My next one will be launching in April. But I also do individual one-on-one breathwork sessions, and I do spiritual coaching sessions. I do plant medicine preparation and integration. And among, anything, I really meet people where they're at. A lot of people just come to me when they don't know what they want. They're like, I need something more in my life. I don't have spiritual anything. What do you think? And so we create like tiny little practices and techniques, and I incorporate some, the work
Yeah.
that I learned with you, self-coaching and and teach people that tool. And it's been really, really helpful for a lot of people that I work with.
I saw that you teach at the studio now too, right?
Yes, yeah. So I'm working at a yoga studio. It's called Sweet Pea Yoga and Wellness, near London, Ontario, about 15 minutes outside of London, Ontario. I live in rural Ontario.
Where there's a lot of snow.
A lot of snow. So I'm there, and I also do holistic work at a spa as well, called Purity Salt Cave and Healing Spa in person. So if you're ever in Grand
Yeah.
Bend, Ontario, which is a top vacation destination, I do that as well.
I wanted to put you on the podcast because I've not recommended anyone from the spiritual world because most people are entrenched in wellness culture. So for me in the anti-diet world, it's impossible to like send people to that world because it's counterintuitive to my work. But I'm very happy to be able to recommend your work here.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited that we got to have this conversation. And
Yes.
I know that when I was working with you last year, we often ended up on talks about the spiritual and
Yes.
yeah, there's so much crossover in the toxicity of these
But that's
worlds.
what you were meant to do. I still remember a session and I was looking in your background and you had this beautiful spiritual painting, I think it was. I'm like, this is what you're meant to do. You're just meant to do it without wellness culture. That's the
Hmm.
only word. Like, but in my view, you are where you're meant to be.
Oh,
You're a
thank
gift to that world.
you. I appreciate that. Thank you. As are you.
Thank you, Coach Meg, for being here.
You're so welcome. My pleasure.